Nigeria's opposition parties are facing a critical test as the 2027 general elections approach, with internal crisis and fragmentation threatening the country's democratic foundations. The main opposition parties, including the People's Democratic Party, Labour Party and the African Democratic Congress, among others, are all grappling with severe leadership struggles and ideological divisions that have left them unable to present a coherent alternative to the ruling All Progressives Congress. The PDP remains divided between factions, while the Labour Party struggles with internal disagreements despite its surge in popularity during the 2023 elections. While this disunity has already cost opposition parties electorally, as seen in the 2023 presidential race, where divided opposition forces failed to capitalize on voter discontent. For a conversation on the state of opposition parties and why they're reeling from one crisis to another, public affairs analyst Nick Agule joins us now. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsday.
Good afternoon, and thank you for welcoming me on your show, and good afternoon to our viewers globally.
So, Mr. Agule, why do you think most opposition parties in Nigeria, let's focus especially on the PDP and the Labour Party, why do you think they're grappling with persistent leadership crisis and internal divisions?
I think the problem is personal interest. For an opposition to thrive in a presidential democracy like ours, you need people who are selfless, who have eyes for the national good, and their interest is to ensure that Nigeria gets competent leadership. And for such people, it is not about their own self-interest, but it's about the national interest. And that is what is missing in the Nigerian opposition scene, in the sense that we have politicians who want to run the affairs of parties instead of allowing parties to run the affairs of politicians. And so that's the problem we have. There are other democracies, like in the parliamentary democracy, you have opposition as an official arm of government. It's a shadow government. And then it becomes mandatory that you have to have an opposition government that is funded by the monarchy or by the parliament. But in Nigeria, we don't have that because we are in a presidential system. And this presidential system means parties need to build themselves and become strong and become institutionalized in such a way that individuals will not be able to take over the parties. But that's not what we have been seeing. And I think this is a lesson. What is happening to the PDP, like you mentioned specifically, is a lesson to all political parties, including the APC that is in government today. Because let's not forget, the PDP started off the Fourth Republic from 1999 to 2015. That is 16 years. And if within that 16 years, they have built a system where an opposition party will be allowed to thrive and to be able to act as a check and balance on the government in power, the PDP, who are in opposition now, will be benefiting from such powers, from such a system. But they didn't. They ruled like a one-party state. They ruled in a very authoritarian way, and that is what they are now suffering. And that is a message to the APC that whilst you are in power, just try and make sure that we have a system where if tomorrow you come into opposition, you will be allowed to operate as a political party.
And I'm wondering if, in your opinion, if the ruling party, APC, could be held culpable for exacerbating some of these internal crises that are seen in the opposition party, particularly in the PDP, through political maneuvering, co-option, or weaponizing of the state institutions?
I mean, the issue with the PDP is very clear. We can see it. Is there on the table for anyone to see that we have a situation where the leadership of the party seems to be working at cross purposes with the party. So we have a secretary of the party who is not working in tandem with the other executives. So as we see now, there is a split in the executive of the PDP. The chairman of the party has gone with some executives, and the secretary has formed his own alternative executive. And basically what that is saying is that there is not going to be any party. The PDP is in a chokehold, because if you don't have the chairman and the secretary agreeing, how are they going to sign documentation that will go over to, say, INEC? And so that is why you can see that there is a lot of people decamping from the PDP. Why? Because they are looking ahead to the 2027 elections. And they are saying, if we are in this position where the chairman and the secretary are not going to be able to sign my nomination papers to INEC, then I'm not going to be able to stand for an election in 2027. And I think that is something that the National Assembly needs to look at. Because what is happening to the PDP now shows that anybody can pin down a political party by simply getting the secretary of the party, or maybe even the chairman, on their side, who refuses to do what the party wants. And that's basically the end of the party. Because even for you to remove that secretary, you need a national convention. And it is that secretary who will have to sign a letter to INEC, notifying INEC that we are going to have a national convention to remove me. And so you see that that's going to be a problem. So I think this is something that really needs to be looked at.
Now, Mr. Agule, what danger then does a fractured opposition landscape pose to the integrity and competitiveness of Nigeria's 2027 general election and, of course, our country's democracy?
So if I just want to use a basic analogy, if you say you have made an ogbono soup, there are certain ingredients that must go in that soup to make it an ogbono soup. Otherwise, it's not an ogbono soup. And I'm saying that in relation to a democracy. For you to have a democracy, there are certain ingredients that must go into the system to make it a democracy. And one of those ingredients is a virile opposition. If you don't have an opposition, it then means that this is a dictatorship or an authoritarian system or a one-party state. And we know states such as North Korea, China, maybe even Russia to some extent, where you have this kind of one-party system, you can clearly see that they are not democracies. So if Nigeria says we're a democracy, we have to create room to ensure that the opposition have their space. You know, like as it is said, the minority will always have their say, and the majority will have their way. So the government in power needs to create the enabling environment for opposition politics to thrive. And in addition to that, of course, the other ingredients of democracy are, of course, the rule of law, where everyone comes before the law equally, and then, of course, sanctity of the electoral system, the independence of the judiciary, the independence of the legislative arm of government, and, of course, the people arm of government must be given its own powers to also operate, not even in opposition, but in collaboration with the government in power, and put the necessary pressures to ensure that good governance is delivered. Because you know what? I don't think there's anywhere in the world where good governance is delivered without a strong opposition or demand from the people for such good governance to come through.
And we've all heard the talks of a grand coalition or a merging of forces, so to speak. But in light of a lot of these parties' inability to even manage their own internal politics and their single-party structures, do you even think that the structure of a grand coalition can hold long enough to reach the election period?
So a grand coalition actually had prior to the 2015 election, and that is the APC, which is an amalgam of CNC, Buhari's CPC as it was, then part of the AC Action Congress, then of course some parts of ABGA, then splinter group of PDP and all of that. It was a grand coalition, and actually they took power in 2015. So it is very possible for this to happen, but the idea behind it is that the proponents, the major actors, have to act selflessly. So if you look at the APC coalition in 2015, in the run-up to the 2015 elections, even though the current president, President Tinubu, was one of the architects of that coalition, you realize that he didn't seek election himself. Instead, he put forward President Buhari, who won the elections. It's the same way those who are trying to build a grand coalition now, they have to accept that, look, I must not go in for every election. You know, in terms of political strategy, we can set up this coalition and we can put forward a candidate that, you know, we know is going to be able to bring home the goods. And then thereafter, we are going to see what happens next. And if that happens, then of course, the Nigeria we have today, there is so much discontent, both amongst the people and in the political class, such that if the politicians are willing and ready to sacrifice their personal ambitions, they'll be able to form a grand coalition, although the time is fast ebbing away. We're about to end 2025, and then next year is electioneering campaign. So if you are forming that grand coalition, you better do it very, very soon.
But then, you know, I'm wondering, to what extent are this crisis and this opposition parties rooted in ideology or policy-driven politics? Or is this simply about personality clashes or the struggle for control of party structure?
Well, so you can clearly see that all that you have mentioned is in the mix. You will see that politicians are jostling for space, and basically it is all about eyes on the elections in 2027. Everyone wants to contest for elections. And I think that does a lot of harm to the ability to be able to form parties that are institutionalized, that are strong, that can stand the test of time, and that will be able to be a legitimate opposition to the party in power. So it's what politicians need to really look at. They need to sit back and say, should my personal ambition override the collective interest or even the national interest? Or should I just throw my hat into every electoral contest, regardless of the fact that maybe the mathematics does not favor me? For instance, we're talking about 2027. The parties will have to be conscious about the fact that even though it's not written down in our constitution, Nigerians have at the back of their minds that if a northerner was in power from 2015 to 2023, which is 8 years, then power should rotate to the south for another 8 years. And the President Tinubu is there, he's a southerner, he's done 4 years, and the opposition parties need to put that at the back of their minds that, look, if we put forward a northerner now, there will be some sort of imbalance. So it is better we put a southerner to see if they will be able to run a term or maybe even 2. But then who will that be? That is where sacrifice, personal sacrifice of the political gladiators comes in, where they will sacrifice their own personal interest for the sake of their parties and the nation.
And speaking of 2027, usually a strong opposition leads the charge in electoral reforms or the discussion of electoral reforms. Well, given the current state of disarray of the parties, are any of them failing to, well, they are failing to mobilize at all for necessary changes to the electoral framework? Does this in any way jeopardize the upcoming 2027 polls?
Absolutely. Everything we're discussing here falls into the water if the election itself is not free, fair, and credible. Because regardless of the strength of the opposition, if the electoral umpire does not carry out its functions in a way that the people's votes count, then everything comes to naught. And that is why electoral reforms is very important. It is something that both the ruling APC and opposition parties like the PDP, the Labour Party, or even the new party, the ADC, not new, but the party that has now been resurrected, should all have hands together on deck to ensure that we have electoral reforms that will make it very difficult to rig elections, electoral reforms that will ensure that whatever is the will of the people at the ballot box, that is what happens. And one of the things I would like to add is that I think it's high time now that Nigeria should consider independent candidature. What is stopping people from contesting for elections as independent? Because bringing everybody to a party gives the party so much powers. You know, they have the power to do and undo. They have the powers to put forward candidates that are not credible to us. Because if candidates are credible, but the parties don't put them forward to the electorate, there's no way those candidates will have a chance of being elected. So there is absolutely no reason why in the 21st century today, with all of the modern systems that we have, and the fact that our democracy has gone 26 unbroken years, that we cannot allow for independent candidature, because that will be another form of opposition, but this will be an opposition led by individuals. And I think that space needs to be opened up as well.
Public affairs analyst Nick Agule, thank you so much for joining us on Newsday.